It's the Let's Talk Polyamory podcast, where we talk about all things consensual non-monogamy, polyamory, swinging, and all things about how you can have a secure and sexy relationship. Now here's your hosts, Tara and Andre. Hello, Andre.
Hey, Tara.
So, for those of us who don't know us, I'm Tara Lynn Franco. I'm a relationship and awesomeness coach.
And I'm Andre Turcotte. I'm a sex-positive registered psychotherapist.
Yeah. So we are Team TNA. A lot of this, Andre, we've learned through our training, but also working with couples and individuals who are going through this sort of navigation transition process right now.
Yeah, they're transitioning from being what we call a closed relationship, being monogamous, to being an open relationship, being non-monogamous. And
Exactly.
the transition is, it's interesting what path people are going to take. Are they going to take the one that is of least resistance with least amount of bumps, or are they going to find themselves working through the mud?
Exactly. And that's why we talk about attachment styles, because our attachment styles, like how we present ourselves in relationships, has a huge impact in this. And so that's why it's part of our program as well. So let's start in. So we did share the attachment style quiz. Do you know your attachment style, Andre? Your default attachment style?
Well, it's an interesting question if I know my attachment style. I think it also depends on when it might have been taken and what were the circumstances, who was I with. So we are plastic as human beings by nature, right? We change and we adapt. That's why there are billions of us, quite literally, because we are so flexible, but we do change over time. And depending on where we're coming from, where we are and where we're going, it may shift over time. So the attachment styles that we're looking at are often imprinted on us through our caretakers, right? Our experience as children, our object relations, and they may inform us and create a certain type of position, but that's not to say that that will remain fixed and imprinted with us forever. In fact, much of the work we do is to help bring us from one of the insecure relationship styles to a more secure relationship style. So my initial relationship style was less secure, and today the latest one that I've done indicates that I'm much more secure.
Exactly. Yeah, it's this how we are in relationships, or how we is directly related to how we experience closeness with our attachment figures, like you said, our parents, caregivers, siblings, even grandparents. And that's what sort of forms our, like what I like to refer to as our default style. And I say default is because often if we've worked on things, sometimes when we're triggered, we might default to that other attachment style because it's more familiar and that sort of thing. So, and all these things, I think, they impact how secure we feel in our relationship, the personal meaning we give experiences we have, and then any expectations, both positive and negative, we have in our relationships.
Yeah, exactly.
And what's interesting as well, what I find interesting, we've done a lot of reading lately because we've been building our program, and one of the modules is on building secure attachment. And some of the reading we were doing talks about unconsciously choosing partners to act out our parents' familiar roles, or we might even take them on ourselves, even when we swear we're not going to pick partners that are like our parents. And then we continue to have that repetition, even if we're not consciously aware of it.
That's it, exactly right. So it's what's called in formal analytic terms as the repetition compulsion. So we may have the insight, we may have the awareness that we're not wanting to do this. Our conscious mind says no, and yet our unconscious mind may still be playing out things that are unresolved, or patterns that, while they may be difficult, they may be familiar to us. So we go to those things, and then we realize this isn't working so well, but then we might be able to go through another process, an authentic emotional process, where we are able to realize and be comfortable in another, perhaps more secure way of being.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So I'm going to share our attachment styles, because we did it a while ago, I would say, which speaks to the idea of being plastic and it changing over time. And it can be in the moment, right? Just like STI testing, right? It's a test. If you do a quiz like the one we shared, it's a picture of a moment in time, right? And so this is what we had probably late 2022. And you could see we both have quite a high secure attachment, and then varying levels of anxious, avoidant, and then I think you had a little bit of disorganized in that way back then. And, to me, I'm like, yeah, that represents me. I feel pretty secure and that sort of thing. But interestingly, I did the quiz yesterday and you did yours today, and it's a much different picture. And so I'm so curious as to what's happened. Now, I think that they've updated that quiz, so that could be factoring it in. But it's showing a lot more of the insecure attachment styles in the balance for me than the secure, which I thought was really interesting. Any thoughts on this?
Yours has changed dramatically. And yes, I wonder if it is in fact the way that they are scoring the results. But I'm curious to know, regardless of what they say about your results, how do you feel about it? Because mine has shifted quite a bit as well, comparatively. I think I was maybe around 50% organized in the first one, secure in the first one, and it's seeming to indicate less secure now, percentage-wise, and yet I feel much more secure. So I think, it's always good to question the questioner.
Exactly. Because I think we were even talking, the last couple of days about preparing for this live and for our training last week in the program. And I was feeling like we were talking about how great we felt despite being apart. I mean, not great, like I miss you, like I wish you were here, but I'm feeling very good and comfort with that distance, and we're going to talk a bit about that when we go through the styles. But I just, I want you here. I don't feel like you being distant changes my attachment to you. Like, in fact, we were both at different parties and we connected through that and said hello. And, you were with somebody else. I was with a group of people, and it was like, I felt great, in fact.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because, and I'll speak for myself, I feel that the level of secure attachment is greater now. I feel more secure. And yet the results that we've taken most recently are not indicating that. In fact, the numbers seem to indicate that it's gone in the opposite direction. But, to look at it in a kind of scientific method way, we've already changed the variable of the testing. So the results may then also yield different results, obviously, right? But I think the biggest part of it, kind of like dream interpretation or whatever it is, the words that we choose, what is it that we feel about it? How do we feel about it? So do you feel as though these numbers are accurate? Do they make you feel as though they understand you? But do you, most importantly, start to receive the information necessary? Does it help you to ask questions? Do certain questions in the quiz resonate with you? Or do you say, well, no, that's really not appropriate. It's not me. I don't identify with that. And some people really, just by asking the questions, are already becoming better informed themselves just by starting the dialogue.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's a point in time, and it's also just information. It's data. So the idea of doing these things, any of these kind of quizzes, is just to, like you said, see what the results are, and then think about and consider it. Just like friends that give advice, like you can hear them, listen to them, but you don't necessarily have to take that advice if it doesn't feel aligned. It's just data, right? All data. So, yeah.
But the point being really for me is that it starts a conversation, right? That we should talk about everything, find out how we feel about it.
Yeah, like someone said in the comments, it's like, maybe it's because we've been separate for so long, I feel less attached, or, and it's not really that I am have insecure attachment. It's just that I feel less attached in this moment just because we're physically not in the same space, which is a total possibility, right? Okay, so let's jump into the different styles. So I'll share this diagram, and this is taken from Jessica Fern's Polysecure, which is a great book. And what I love about this, I mean, there's lots of books and resources on attachment theory, but what I like about this is that it adds that extra layer of non-monogamy and how your attachment style may impact you with that extra lens of non-monogamy. So in that way, it's a really great book. I loved it. I felt like I had to read it a few times to get really the gist of it, because there's a lot of theoretical stuff in that. So that's why we're here. We come and we break down these things a little more simply. So as this diagram shows, our attachment style is usually associated with either with a low to high avoidance and anxiety level. So, and like you said, I think I'd like to add that that we are plastic, like you said, and it's possible to go from an insecure style to a more secure position over time when you take specific intentional actions and do some work. So,
yeah, and unfortunately, the same is true of taking somebody who is rather secure, and you can put them into less secure venues, right, with people who might not be as secure, and it might make them feel less secure as well. So we are very often a product of the constellations, the company we keep. Exactly. We might then go back to our secure relationship when we feel more secure with the people around us. So we are not islands in this, but we can have active mindfulness in going through situations and remind ourselves that we are secure, but we are able to maintain this position even if the scenarios are less so. So it's kind of like when we start opening up, we might say, well, these are a lot of unknown factors, a lot of variables coming at me. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to feel, but we can either find a good partner who's supportive and we can explain and talk about these things with each other, or we can simply go into our own and draw on our own banks of information and say, well, okay, I have evidence to support that I am okay, and we'll be okay.
But the point I want to make about that too is that that's not always easy to do, right? Everyone has to be willing to do that work and looking for those things. And sometimes it's hard to really break them down if you've had some trauma, because these things are imprinted on us over time, right? I just wanted to show this for one more second, just because there's a couple of different names. And so I think sometimes people get confused when different people talk about attachment because they use different words. And I think that's because there's different words, terms used, whether it's attachment experienced in childhood versus attachment in adulthood. And so in this diagram, the red is the childhood and the gray is the adult. But I think for simplicity purposes, I like the childhood ones because I think they're more familiar.
It seems to go as kind of like commonplace in our vernacular, right? People identify with it. They say, I'm kind of anxious or I'm avoidant, and we kind of get the idea of it.
Exactly. Okay, so let's start with secure attachment. So secure attachment is characterized generally by low avoidance and low anxiety in a relationship. So this is when, as children, you have caregivers who are emotionally available, they're paying attention to you, they're consistent, and they're providing good enough care and affection and attention.
Yeah.
So children know that they have a secure base from which that they can explore and learn and thrive, and they have someone there when needed. So they're not on their own. So they can go out, do that exploration, but they have that caregiver figure that's there as a safe haven should something come up.
That goes into the idea of object constancy. So we know that even though we don't have the object in plain sight, we're able to touch them, we know we've incorporated them into our mind, and we know that we can go and they'll be with us, and we can come back and they'll be with us.
Oh, I should have said for people who are watching to pay attention to these characteristics, because some of these things we want you to see, think about any of these that you identify as we go through and make note of them. You can even put them in the comments, because that's part of the activity that's in the worksheet, is to recognize some of these things in yourself as a child and as an adult, as a way of sort of working through them. Okay. So where were we? So children with secure attachment build trust in others, and they have, emotional resilience. You know what I mean? They more freely give love and receive love because they trust that it's there for them, right? So when people with who have secure attachment when their children become adults, so they tend to have greater confidence and self-esteem. They have some more balance in their life. And it was interesting. One of the articles we were reading talked about having better choices in relationships, which is interesting. I guess it's more attractive to be a secure people in some ways. As a caveat, because sometimes we want the bad girls and the bad boys, right?
Sometimes, but I think the having greater choice comes from the idea that we're secure, that we don't feel as though we necessarily need one type or the other, that we can go to If we are coming from a secure place, we can go to somebody who might feel a little bit more avoidant or anxious, knowing that we're okay, and it can be transferred into those relationships, knowing that we'll be okay in those style of relationships as well.
Yes. Sorry, it froze. I think I've been having trouble with the internet here. Anyway. So people with secure attachment as all adults have healthy boundaries. I mean, you're aware of your boundaries. Fluidness in terms of intimacy and also being an individual. So they can be very intimate and emotionally close with someone, but they can also be like their own person, autonomous, their own individual, and are comfortable with social engagements. So big groups, small groups, that sort of thing. So this is the other part that we were talking about earlier, is feeling secure even when you're apart. So you can internalize your partner's love and then self-regulate your emotions when your partner's not with you.
Absolutely. It's that knowledge, that feeling that you will be okay because you've had that past experience. You've had that secure bond in the past. So you were able to bring that forward.
Exactly. So comfortable with warm and close relationships. You can depend on your partners. You feel like you can depend on your partners, and you allow them to depend on you. You can, adults with secure attachment can usually more easily ask for their needs to be met. So if they want or need something, and less fear around rejection or being threatened by others. So in non-monogamy, this is an important characteristic.
Indeed it is.
So then we'll go to avoidant. Whoops, I'm just going to show the chart again so people can see it. So avoidant is in the bottom left. So characterized by low anxiety, but high avoidance.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess it could be argued that the avoidant has low anxiety because they avoid the situation. If they're in it, they might feel as though they are more anxious, right? So their anxiety may already prevent them from attaching. They avoid putting themselves in those type of situations.
Yes. And what how we've experienced with people when there's partnerships, like the classic partnerships of avoidant and anxious, the avoidant actually becomes anxious when the anxious person is acting on their anxiousness, and they will really want to pull away because it feels very uncomfortable to be in that position.
Right. But sometimes also what happens is they might form what many might consider to be a codependent relationship, right? So there's a symbiosis that's connected to them where one feeds off the other.
So in children would gain an avoidant attachment style when their parent or caregiver is emotionally unavailable or insensitive or distant or even rejecting. So the child might feel that their emotional needs and their desire for connection are either denied or they're just not met. So as a result, they can deactivate emotionally, step away, avoid closeness, and do not trust others easily. And so I just want to put a note to this is sometimes when a child experiences this with a caregiver, it's not an intentional part of that caregiver to be distant or emotionally unavailable. It can be situational, like a single parent who has to work all the time, or they may be avoiding themselves and have a hard time in sharing that with the child. So.
But in some ways, I guess you could argue that being avoidant in that way is it's a coping mechanism. It is a strategy to keep ourselves safe because really what we're doing as little children is we're wanting to be loved. We feel as though it's not as safe or the person's not available. So then we avoid putting ourselves out there being overly vulnerable. So It becomes a defense mechanism, although it is a ill-formed compromise formation because it might have worked as a child in some ways to keep us alive, to spare us from these difficult feelings, but it is not necessarily going to offer us fulfilling relationships as adults. It's not going to allow us that true intimacy to feel connected or secure.
Right. And, people like as adults, people with a more avoidant attachment style, they're very independent and self-reliant. They don't want to rely on their partners, and they don't want to be relied on by their partners. Right. Which is, that independence can be really valuable characteristic that you can use in other parts of your life, like work and that sort of thing. Be very driven. But also may make things difficult, for example, to work in teams and groups because you don't want to have that interaction.
Precisely, yes.
Yeah. So in adults, some of the things that you may experience if you are an avoidant attachment style is when difficult things arise, you may remove yourself to think through things on your own. And sometimes, the other hard part I think that people experience that we've had people tell us is that they just feel like they can't provide the needs for their partners. They just can't give them the emotional security that they require.
It's rather taxing for them, right? It's hard for them to be present in that way at times.
It's super taxing. So, okay, so let's move on. So these are just really brief overviews we're giving you today, because I think, the point is understanding your attachment or working towards that will help you start to break down what you can do about it. So the next one here is anxious, which is at the top, which is characterized by low avoidance and high anxiety. So is this you? Do you have it? Do you recognize any of these things in yourself? So as children, their caregivers might have been unreliable in providing emotional support and regulations. So the parent might be anxious themselves. They might be neglectful. They may be inconsistent or unavailable. So as a result, the child might feel like they cannot rely on the relationship.
Yeah. And, that inconsistency, I think we'll see more of that when we start to look at disorganized as well, because often that inconsistency is the messaging, either demonstrated through our actions or how we speak or the emotions that we're allowing, where it says, come here, go away, come here, go away. You're good, you're bad. And it kind of leaves us not really knowing, and can then create feelings of anxiety. Where do I stand? How is it going to be? Is it safe? Is it unsafe? We don't know. And it creates
So as a child, and even as adults, you may worry that your needs are not going to be met. And so you're sort of on the constant lookout for clues or cues as to what actions you may be taking may or may not influence your caregiver or your partner's response. So it's like that emotional seesaw of needs being met and not being met. So, children will tend to hyperactivate. So they will be more demanding. They will constantly go back to their caregiver, coming back and feeling like getting attention. So they're constantly on that state of alert, constantly feeling anxious.
Right.
Another characteristic that happens in both children or adults is this idea of abandonment, this fear of abandonment, or being unnoticed or underappreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. And that fear of abandonment is part of the preservation aspect, right? So I need to know how things are going. I need to know if I'm going to feel okay. So it triggers the anxiety in me, the anticipation of it, right? So it's not to say that all anxiety is bad. We need some anxiety. It keeps us alive, right? We want to know if the lion is on the plane. We need to be ready to go and protect ourselves. But too much of it will influence our psychic position and be taxing to us. It is near impossible to always be on that high alert. It really does take a toll on us, right? But it comes to understand its position. It comes from the necessity of being prepared. We don't know where our caretakers are going to be, so we then become hyperactive in looking at their needs, our needs, what's going on in the situation. We need to be able to assess that.
People with the anxious attachment style, as opposed to someone who's more secure, might feel nervous about being separated from their partner. And that's where we start to sort of build the stories and worry about what's actually going on, what they're thinking about, and all that stuff, and can really, cause a lot of hurt and, dread. And you can feel it in your body, when you have that anxiousness. Like, I don't feel that in my relationship, but when I'm feeling anxious, I can really feel it in my body. And I really have to get out of that state because it's hard, to deal with those feelings because can be so intense.
Yeah, it certainly can. And they, as you say, may be highlighted in being in an open relationship and polyamorous, where we don't have that model, that structure, that offering that says, well, you and I will be together forever, whether it's true or not is not the question here. It's the idea that we are affording ourselves this model that would give us the idea that we're going to be secure, that when we come into open relating, now all of a sudden we have partners everywhere, and our partner is going out with somebody else, and where is that going to leave me, and how am I going to be it? So it may be initially the worst possible scenario for us until we are able to recognize these things and then move from being anxious into secure attachment. And it is possible to do.
Yeah, because if you're starting from monogamy, even if you came into a relationship with a more insecure attachment style, you may feel comfort in the security in your relationship as monogamy, like you said. But as soon as, and then so people will open up and start to explore, and then there some of these, attachment patterns start to emerge when you start seeing people and doing things and that sort of thing. And it's like, you're like, whoa. And people can be quite surprised by it, which is why we talk about it and try to understand it more.
But that's not to say that we don't find anxious people in marriages or in close relationships as well, right? Even if we have these tenets that say we're going to subscribe to this, we might even have a marital contract that says this. It doesn't mean that it's going to free us of these anxieties that we might have. The fear of abandonment may still be there regardless.
Exactly. Which is why you need to kind of work on the same things, and not just rely on that structure, because your partner could be traveling for work, they could be seeing friends, and you might feel like you're all on your own, or you might be, creating a lot of dialogue and inner stories about your relationship and what's happening with them, regardless of how you relate, if you're monogamous or not monogamous.
You're absolutely right about the stories, because even if they're not away, right? They may be right next to you, holding you, telling you that they love you, and you might still question it and be suspicious of it and feel anxious about it. And then even the idea that maybe they really do love you might, that in itself, make you feel anxious if you're not willing and able and ready to receive it.
Yeah. Well, some of the things I've heard from people recently who are monogamous is that, they're having trouble communicating with their partner, and this is causing a lot of anxiety for them. And they feel unattached because it feels like they can't agree on certain things. And because they're having some trouble communicating, it sort of creates this anxiety within the relationship. And it's hard when, you're going through that. So communication.
That's what it's all about.
I think we're pretty much covered anxious. Let's go into the last one, which is disorganized. So this is where you have attachment style where you have high levels of anxiety and high avoidance. So it's quite interesting. This is what I would call, would you say this is like the extreme version of insecure attachment?
Absolutely. So if you were to chart it on a spectrum, yes, this would be at the polar opposite of secure attachment. And it's really unfortunate because these people have both the desire for high avoidance, and if they do connect, they feel high anxiety. Even just the thought of it might make them feel anxious, right? So they are cursed with both, unfortunately. And often, as we see in evidence, it is because there is perhaps trauma that they've experienced in the past, whether it is the maltreatment from their caretaker or simply neglect. There's a whole bunch of things that might have caused them to be this way. But again, the good news is that it is not written in concrete. We are flexible, we are plastic, and in time, we can overcome this position. Maybe you tell us a little bit about the disorganized?
So in this one, it's like what you said earlier, like caregivers may be giving them conflicting messages that come here, go away, which, creates situations for the children that are like, it feels like they're unsolvable or unwinnable. Like if I do this, I'm going to get in trouble. If I do that, I'm going to be in trouble. If I come close, I'm going to be good. You know what I mean? It's all these mixed messages. So it can cause like a lot of confusion. Children can be frightened, disoriented, really not understanding how to relate to people. And especially if there's been some sort of trauma, and usually someone has more disorganized if there's been some, like you said, some sort of trauma, chaos, and a parent that might be controlling or abusive, or family members that have been abusive and that haven't situations that haven't been dealt with. that sort of thing. So so as a child, you may either dissociate or you may be more like aggressive with your behavior. And I think that can probably happen as well in adults. So
yeah, it certainly is. I mean, just because you become 18 and pass over that threshold, being adult, doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to change all these patterns, right? The impressions are made in the unconscious, and the unconscious has no regard for chronological time. So these things can be just as fresh as when we were little kids.
yeah, exactly. So so people with disorganized attachment style might also have that feeling of being worried about rejected, but also being worried about being abandoned. And so lots of anxiety in their relationships. So, and like you said earlier, they have an extreme need for closeness or intimacy, but also fear rejection. So then it causes this conflict within them that kind of holds them emotionally hostage. Like, I want to get close, but I'm also afraid of being abandoned. So you're almost, sometimes people that have more disorganized, dominant attachment style will like self-sabotage the relationship because it's going to end anyways, right? So it's kind of it's a tough situation for people. So people with disorganized attachment styles can also be triggered easily. They can have some psychological problems, traumas within them that they may be aware of or not. And they could, they could act out and have more dysfunctional relationships, and which can even include to the extreme violence or abuse, substance abuse, and that sort of thing. So that's a tough one.
It is, but we've come across it many times before. And again, it's not hopeless, right? I mean, the idea is that we have a willingness to look introspectively at these things and participate in our therapy and to go beyond what is known to us. Even though it may be rather uncomfortable at times or difficult, we persevere and we come out the other side where we feel better about it and we become more secure.
Mm-hmm. I'm so curious because this was our charts, and I actually had a bigger chunk of disorganized. Last time I did the test, I didn't have that disorganized. So I'm so curious. I'm gonna like think about, what it is that may have caused that. Maybe I need to look at the questions again, but it's worth looking at, right? Like the data, as we said.
If nothing else, even if it is not entirely accurate, at least it starts us thinking about it and starts a conversation about it.
So now that you know your attachment style, so what can you do now that you're aware? So the first thing is you can get our worksheet and, start to, like I said, think about what characteristics you see in yourself, and what circumstances trigger these responses, or what might be behind them. So that's a first step. And then the second part, which I think is the harder part to do on your own, but you can start once you have a better understanding of your attachment, is what are the things that you can do to interrupt this pattern in your relationship? So what internal work can you do? And then what would you like support on, and what would you like to work on with your partner or partners? So we talked about creating and fostering the components of secure attachment. So that secure base, having a place where we know we're safe and can go out and explore and be an individual. And then the safe haven. So knowing we can go to our partner when things are tough and it doesn't risk the relationship. So what are the things, so here we can start to think about what those things are. And then the last thing, which I think, we've talked about and you just mentioned, is being patient with yourself and getting support. So, these attachment patterns that we're experiencing have built up over time and may require some deep work to unravel. And sometimes that can't be done on our own, at least not in a quick way. And so that's why the support of a therapist or working with people like us, because this is work we do, can help do this. So that's the basic overview. So, if you need support, this is where we come in. We're therapists and coach, but we also have a group program, which one of the components is understanding and learn to secure attachment in your non-monogamous relationship. If you want to know more about the program, or if you're ready to understand how your attachment style is impacting your relationship and walk away with an action plan of next steps to start to build secure attachment in your relationship. So you're invited to book a free 45-minute relationship rescue call with me. So it's goteranandre.com/relationship rescue. We can talk about what's going on in your relationship and what next steps you can take.
Fantastic.
That was a good one. So hope everybody enjoyed that. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
If you want to explore polyamory, open up a relationship, or try your hand at swinging, we can help. Check out our website at teranandre.com for information on our Poly Newbies digital course or our deeper dive open relationship and polyamory mastery program where you get direct coaching from us. There's also other individual and couples coaching options there as well. Thanks for listening to the Let's Talk Polyamory podcast with TNA. Don't forget to subscribe and give us some love on your favorite podcasting platform. You can check out the show notes for any of the links to the courses or information we talked about today. Thanks and have a fantastic